Welcome to Machine Minds, where technology and humanity meet. I'm your host, Greg Terrusian, founder of Samson Rose, a recruiting and search business focused on the robotics and AI industries. The Machine Minds show is where we dive deep into the intricate world of robotics and artificial intelligence. As a staffing industry leader with a passion for the frontiers of technology, I'm pleased to be bringing you intimate conversations with the founders, investors, and trailblazers who are at the heart of the AI and robotics revolution. In each episode, we dig into their journeys, the applications of the products they're working on, and the breakthroughs that are shaping our future. Join us as we explore how these machine minds are transforming the way we live, work, and understand our world. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or just curious about this amazing field, you'll learn something new with each episode. Let's delve into the extraordinary. Let's delve into machine minds. Hello and welcome to Machine Minds. I'm your host, Greg Terrusian, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Nick Hegeman, co-founder and CEO of PaintJet. Thanks for being on the show today, Nick.
Hey, thanks, Greg. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, my pleasure. Let's jump into it. So for anyone that listens to the show regularly, they'll know I like to start with a bit of background with our guest and kind of set the stage for the conversation. So can you share what was some of your key moments or experiences in your career that led you into entrepreneurship and what you were doing before PaintJet?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting question. There's a winding road on how I ended up in the patent business, given that my educational career is all on the engineering side. And so this is actually kind of goes back to my days in college. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, specifically in the hardware space. And so that everything I was doing was really trying to position towards that future. One of the things that I knew I needed was coming out of college was just more experience on the sales front. And so ended up taking a job as a sales engineer with ExxonMobil, looking at a bunch of different industries. Did that for about 5 years and was finally ready to start and enter into the world of entrepreneurialism. One of the things that was really important to me starting off is that you make so many mistakes as a first-time founder, first-time business owner, is that I didn't feel comfortable someone else paying for those mistakes that needed to be on my dime. And so my first jump into this was looked at a bunch of different options and ended up starting a CertaPro Painters franchise. The intent of that was always to be the first business, not the last business, but allow me to get those early mistakes out of my system and learn from those and then move on to the next business, which is going to be the business I really wanted to focus on. And one of the things I didn't expect was how quickly the need or opportunity for something like PaintJet came along. So CertaPro Painters, for those of you who don't know, it is a franchise system that focuses on commercial and residential painting. And it's designed to take people who have no experience in the trades and teach them how to run profitable painting businesses. And one of the things I can say is basically from minute 3, the labor shortage hits you in the face. I mean, you're out there selling jobs and you don't even have crews to produce them yet. And it's like, yeah, we've got a backlog and we think it can get to you in a month. And then you close the deal and it's like, okay, I got a month to find my crews. And this shortage of skilled labor is just rampant throughout construction, and painting is no different. And just dealing with that on a day-to-day basis really just brought home what the labor shortage means for this industry. And it finally came to a point we're on a 150,000 square foot warehouse. I have to let go of the crew in the middle of it because sometimes it just happens, and that's kind of part of it. And so it ended up being myself, my wife, my brother, my family painting by iPhone light to meet customer deadline. And given my background as an engineer, it was like, okay, this is really stupid. And if I do this again, I'm getting divorced and I don't want to get divorced. So there's got to be a technical solution out there. And that's really where PaintJet
So
came from.
that was the driving force, huh?
Yeah, that was it. I just want to stay married and keep my house.
Yeah.
Those were the thresholds for success.
I mean, very powerful reasons to find a solution for sure. I'm curious though, what you said you wanted to be an entrepreneur from college. So
Yeah.
that's like pretty early on. Curious
Mhm.
why, like what was the background there? Was there family in it? And also why from a hardware engineering
Mhm.
background, you jumped into something like this? It's like, I want to connect those dots.
Yeah, so hardware engineering, I had always been fascinated with something you can touch and feel. Um, and so that was something that I always wanted to do. And then just from a um, what I want to do with my life standpoint, and the ability to build the things that I want to do, spend my time where it needs to be spent. Um, Also had, whether it's like odds and ends growing up or different family members as part, small business owners, those type of things. It's just at the end of the day, if you're building it, um, you tend to have more flexibility and control over long term where you want to go.
Yeah.
And so it's just one of those things like this is what I need to do for where I want to go in my life. And it doesn't need to be tomorrow, but everything that I'm working toward needs to be building towards it.
Love that. It was very intentional to do like a practice run business before you went to your end goal business. I hadn't heard that before. That's really cool. It's normally people do it and by default they're like, it was great that I did that and it failed and I learned a lot, or it's great that I did that and learned along the way just so I knew what I was doing the second time. But it sounded very intentional.
Yeah, and there's also a piece too where I was working for ExxonMobil, and it's a large corporation, good benefits, they pay you well, good company. And it was one of those things where my wife and I were getting ready to have kids, and it's a thing where it's when you got kids, it's not about you. It's about your family and things like healthcare, salary, benefits, pension. All those things matter when you've got kids. So for me, it was, hey, we're going to do it. We got to do it now because otherwise I'm not doing this for 20 years because it's at that point, it's no longer really about you. It's about your family. Um, and so that was really my ticking clock. And when I was looking and evaluating a bunch of different opportunities, whether it was starting something from scratch, um, buying a small business, or looking at a franchise, it was the thing I always had in the back of my mind is what is the most likely to A, be successful, but B, really create a platform that can go let me do the next thing. And so for me, with how CertaPro is set up, if you do it right, you basically take it from zero, can get up to 1.5, and then you can hire a general manager and it can spit off some cash while you go, and you can essentially hire yourself out of the position. And that was really all the intent on it. Now, with me specifically, the way that PaintJet started taking off, even if 10% of my time was spent on CertaPro, it was just a distraction from what the real opportunity was. I eventually sold that, which is interesting experience in and of itself, um, which then just let me turn and really focus on PaintJet.
Yeah. All right, so let's switch gears and talk purely about PaintJet. You mentioned your inspiration for starting it, saving the marriage, saving your house. I'm sure there was more there. You had this glaring realization about the labor shortage. So can you talk us more about like that founding story, how the idea came about, and the particular problems you were trying to solve?
Yeah, I think robots are a thing that we've been hearing are coming, for decades, right? Like we paint cars via robots, and that's been happening since the 70s. Um, and there's been a real challenge in terms of how do you introduce robotics into a highly variable, uncontrolled environments that you commonly find on the construction space. And so when I was looking at, okay, where's the right way to introduce robots, because it's not necessarily it's the technical piece, it's really how do you operationalize that and where do you have the real fit for something that's a repeatable process. And so there was a natural fit in painting large scale objects that are going one or two colors. So for us, think big boxes, big warehouses. It's going one color, maybe there's an accent, but that's really the bread and butter. And then being able to successfully paint that gives you license to then go paint other things. And so for us, it's been boxes. And then the next step is curvature in a single axis, which is chemical storage tanks. And then the next step after that is curvature in two axes. So you're looking at ship holes. And if you look at the total market for those type objects, it's pretty significant. It's kind of like one of those sneaky big markets that no one thinks about, but are all over the place. Like we paint 3,000 giant chemical storage tanks a year, and we all do it. And that's in North America, and we just do that by hand. The Navy spends $3 billion alone in painting their ships. That's all going one color, one product, one color. And then you look at the number of warehouses that have to be painted, either new construction or repaint every year, and that's a significant number too. And so it's these things that we don't think about that we need for daily life that have to be painted.
Interesting. How did you become aware of those problems? Because like you said, they're ones people don't really think about. It's not like enticing and sexy where people are like, oh, I'm going to start a company for that.
Yeah, as part of it is looking like, how do I grow my CertaPro business? We're a commercial painter. These are things that we're trying to do. And so warehousing I already had those customers. I had customers in warehousing. I knew that space pretty well in the Nashville area. And so you can extrapolate from that local market to get national numbers. And then as you're in it and you start looking at feedback on the first iteration of technology, you start learning more and more about all these different use cases. And then you can find different articles, reports. The DoD publishes what they spend. And you start looking, it's like, oh, that's a pretty big opportunity. And then you start looking at the mechanics required to paint those objects. And you're like, I think we could probably automate that too. And then in between those, you start looking, okay, so is there an intermediate step that you can do between flat walls and curved boats? And it's end up coming across, well, what about storage tanks? For us, it was the first thing you see are water storage tanks. But if you look at chemical storage, they're even more simple than that. And so that starts looking to be an opportunity. And then once you say, okay, there's an opportunity here, there's a market here, let's go see if there's any legs to this. And you just start talking with industry players, potential customers, those type of things. And one of the things you find is that universally across the board, there is a labor shortage. We have more things that need to be painted and maintained than we have people and experienced skill sets to do so. And so for us, we're really where the first true market pull was when we did our first iteration and did a roadshow on that. And it was like the technology was clunky, the demos didn't go well, and people were giving us deposit checks just hoping that we could eventually figure it out. And when people are giving you checks based on hope, like you've got something real.
Yeah, that's a very serious data point right there. How did you go about assembling the founding team, and what were some of like the early challenges you faced with like getting people on board and getting the project ramping up?
Yeah, so early team was myself, and then I had worked with my co-founder. Actually, him and I first connected while working at CertaPro. He was on CertaPro's commercial operations team, or his operations team, and I actually fell into his geography. So him and I were already working together in terms of how can we build our operational practices within the context of this labor shortage. And then he ended up leaving CertaPro, but him and I stayed in touch, and we were working on this problem in general. So we worked together. And then once we got our system as far as we could take it, then ended up conducted a search for a technical co-founder, and ended up working with a very talented, smart individual that had just graduated, got her PhD from NYU. And so that was the core initial first team. And so it's get these initial contracts, get the initial prototype, go out there, demonstrate some capability in a large market, and then grow and scale from there. Get a little bit of funding, and then continue to execute, continue to add to the team, change things from a business model standpoint, and then just iterate and build on that.
Nice. So it sounds like the strong foundation was definitely needed before you ramp things up there. The flywheel wasn't already going.
Right. No, I mean, we're doing, so there's two things that are pretty challenging for us. One is we're doing a hardware, right? So if you have a technical issue or something like that, you've got to go and recreate hardware, go through testing. So you have longer technical cycles, but then also we are owning the service as well. One of the things that we realized very quickly is that if this business is to grow and scale the way that it needs to, selling the robot outright to painting contractors isn't going to work. You're looking at companies that have very little budget for CapEx. Like a $300 paint pump is a big deal. And so for them to be able to purchase anything of any size, there's just not that many contractors out there that can do that. And then the other piece is, in order to make it attractive enough, essentially you're having to leave 80 to 90% of the value you create on the table. And it just makes for, it can be a nice small business, but it's not what we wanted to create or what our investors wanted to create. And so it was clear that if we were going to be successful, we had to own the entire process, which means own the service, become vertically integrated. And with that, there's a lot of, when you go through that process and until you really hammer it down, you're looking at wild fluctuations in margins and delivery. So until you get that buttoned down, it still is a pretty high risk endeavor. And there's definitely been a lot of challenges that we face going through that process.
Yeah, it's interesting that that's the model that you've used, because I've heard it from a few people. We've had guests on the show previously, like in the ag tech space and stuff like that, lawn care maintenance as well, that have followed a similar model because of that reason, right? The expenditure for the end user is just too high, and then there's also the complexity of them using and maintaining, and then the adoption is also a hurdle you need to overcome. But having your background in the industry already, and then now having the hardware to work on it, is kind of a no-brainer. It's kind of genius.
Yeah, it was one of the things that became real obvious for us. Because then when you look at, all right, type of business performance and metrics that you need to put forth in order to get really a fund returning outcome, and it's the dollar amounts in construction are relatively large. Like you look at in the oil and gas space, each one of those tanks is $250,000, and you can realize that in a couple months. Whereas compared to the SaaS space, that can be a pretty large annual contract. And so your ability to stack revenues if you own the entire process is pretty compelling when it gets to the actual business model.
Right. And I want to talk about, I don't know how much of that you can share, but or just to highlight, we were talking offline beforehand, that you guys are in a great space. It looks like next year, you said you'll probably be cash flow positive as well, which is huge. That's a great feat in this market. And then obviously owning, operating, and running hardware as well.
Yeah, there's a piece that if you do it right and you get your operational pieces down properly, that you're able to spit off cash in a way that's pretty rare for a lot of venture-backed entities. and that ultimately allows you options um, on outcomes and routes for all the stakeholders. And so by doing this, this allows us to pick the best option for our stakeholders, um, where we're not forced to go down any one specific path. And I think that flexibility, especially in a time like this, is um, for the right partners something that's very desirable.
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk about the technology and product in a little bit more detail. So you leverage robotics, various technologies as well, to provide this service and do the job. But can you explain in more detail how it works and what you're doing?
Yeah, so our robotic system, what we focus on is really we do two things. Number one, we create an end effector. It's so our system's probably a 3x6 by 2 when you look at from a dimensions, and those are in feet, and it connects to an industry standard man lift. And then our system is able to connect with that man lift, and then we're able to remote control both our system and the man lift directly from the ground. So essentially, we are able to turn that man lift into a mobile, large robotic arm, and our system is just the end effector. And the reason why that's effective is because that's how all of these surfaces are currently accessed, is through those specific man lifts. And so access is always the challenge. And what that allows us to do is not only does it provide access, but also from a CapEx standpoint, we don't have to create our own individual system that can go up and down. You may have to go down to 3 feet. You may have to go up to 180 feet. You may have to go up and over objects. And so if you've got to create something that can handle everything, that's a pretty big piece of equipment that's difficult to move around. Whereas by working in conjunction with the industry standard man lifts and the current rental distribution network, those are all variable costs that we can pass on to the customer, and we don't have to make that CapEx investment in that infrastructure to support our technology.
Got it. So you're retrofitting the existing hardware that they already have or they're already renting?
So we're not even retrofitting. It's just we just plug into it. And so it's non-invasive. We just plug into it, and we're able to remote control both our system and theirs.
Lovely. And how does your technology and service improve the efficiency and also the precision compared to the traditional methods? I know we mentioned the labor shortage in other areas.
Yeah, so what we're seeing from a throughput standpoint is, so with a team of 2, we're able to paint around 7,500 square feet per hour. That's compared to a traditional team of 3 to 4 that's going to be putting out 1,500 to 2,000 square feet per hour for that entire team. And then the other thing is that we're going to use around 30% less paint, because if you ever actually watch people up in these machines, what they'll end up doing is they can paint what's right in front of them, but then once you get through that area, you've got to move the machine and to the next area, and that can be a pain. And so they're trying to minimize the number of movements they have to make. And so that means that they'll start reaching. And anytime you reach, you take your application from which is perpendicular and consistent to now you're shooting it off at an angle, and you're losing up to 80-90% of the paint you're trying to apply. So not only do you lose that, that just goes out into the atmosphere and never reaches the surface, but then you also have pretty significant differentiations between the thickness of the paint applied. And so what we're able to do is consistently apply paint anywhere from minimum of 4 mils thick, but we can go upwards of 20, 30, whatever the OEM spec calls for, and we can guarantee that that's going to be consistent across the entire surface. Where you may have a little bit of overlap here and there, but for the most part, when we're looking at taking our measurements, for example, we were with a tank, it was 8 mils thick all the way across. Might have had 1 or 2 you're looking at a dozen readings, might have had 1 or 2 that were at 7 mils thick. But when you compare that to the human application, and you're looking at, you can be 3 mils thick in one area, 12 mils thick in the other, and it's just extremely variable from painter to painter. And so being able to not only go faster, but also provide that consistency in application. And then the other piece too is it's just much safer. We control our system from the ground, whereas they'll have multiple people up in the lift. They've got to tie off. They may or may not do that. If you hit a bump or get on an incline improperly, you can turn that lift into a catapult. So just overall, it's just, you've got blind spots. So overall, it's just a much safer, better system and way of applying coatings to these type of applicate or these type of surfaces.
Sounds like it. Yeah, reducing waste, the safety. I'm sure there's like exposure to toxic chemicals and things like that, or even just paint in general. That's a benefit as well to customers in the industry.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you're in the marine and oil and gas environments. In those type of applications, like if you're on the bottom of a ship, it's actually called anti-fouling paint, and those chemicals are specifically designed to kill any marine life that comes into contact with it. Right. So it's designed to prevent barnacles from attaching and those type of thing, algae. So the way that they do that is make it toxic, where if it does, it kills it. Well, that's not something you want people to be around. Similarly, you look at multi-component epoxies. That's some pretty highly volatile chemicals. Your people that are applying that are typically in Tyvek suits. They may have respirators on. They certainly have masks, and so just getting people out of those environments is definitely a bonus. It's not just a faster, more effective way to paint. It's also just a better job too, where it's safer. You're on the ground. You're not by these caustic chemicals. And so there's one of the challenges that we've had is actually like, hey, where's the true benefit? Just given that it positively impacts the space really across the board.
Yeah. Sounds like there's a number of areas that it's having that positive impact. It's huge. Let's shift gears and talk about the team again, because I know we spoke briefly about the founding team and how you found your co-founders, etc. As you guys grow, I know you're still lean and trying to operate like very mindfully and watch spend, etc., as you should. But how critical is it hiring the right people for a company like PaintJet as you go into like your next version of the robot? You start growing from there.
Well, I think it's always something that you're trying to get better at. And for us, it's definitely critical because every single time you hire someone, it takes them 2 to 6 months to ramp up. And then, if you get that wrong, not only did you spend that time and effort in the output, if they do have some changeover, the output probably isn't where you wanted it. So you're not getting the best results, and you've got to go through that process again. And when you're raising money every 12 to 24 months, you don't have a ton of time for redos. And I'd say that's one of the things that we really struggled with starting off, and we've gotten better at it, but it's definitely something, we're continuously honing and trying to get better at it every day, because every hire that we make that doesn't work out, that's ultimately delaying when we can deliver to our customers and into the field.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. I think a point to make as well just on that is if you aren't hiring a ton, if you're not hiring like 100 people a year, you don't have that many learning opportunities to go through. Like you're saying, we're trying to constantly get better. But if you're like, hey, we're hiring 4 people, 5 people this year, maybe, or something like that, or if we lose someone, replacing them, getting better and getting more refined and knowing what you did wrong the first time, it doesn't give you many opportunities to learn from it. So you have to be very intentional, very mindful, take notes, and like analyze what worked and what didn't. Or take input, from partners or other people, whatever it is.
Right. And I think the other thing too is that what we've learned is because we've grown pretty quickly, and sometimes the specific reasons that got you to where you are today are also the specific reasons that are going to prevent you from getting to that next step. Um, and so one of the examples is like, hey, when we first started, it was just like, hey, just figure out how to get a result. It's not going to be a ton of process behind it. There's not going to be a ton of rhyme or reason. You're operating a lot by gut and instinct and just doing whatever it is to get a contract. But ultimately, that doesn't scale. And so as you take the next step, those things that it's like, hey, that was fastest and got us where we needed. But that also over reliance and over dependence on that as you grow is also the reason why it breaks apart later down the road. And so now you have to supplement and transition between one skill set to the other. And anytime you're doing that, that can bring its own set of challenges as well.
For sure. Yeah. I talk about it a lot. In this example, it's probably not the exact same thing, but it's like retraining, reskilling. But I talk about shedding staff, like the people. And in this way, it's kind of like the processes or mindset that get you to a certain point aren't the same one that's going to help you get to your next stage of funding, your next robot release, your next growth milestone. So whether you reallocate staff, shed those staff and bring new people in, or retrain on the mindset, processes, way of doing it, they're all like an evolution step in a company's journey. Without doing it properly, like it's going to be detrimental, obviously.
Yeah, and you got to make these changes. I think all the literature out there, it takes around 4 years to do a complete culture overhaul within a lot of organizations, but you're making these changes in 12 months, just with how quickly things are changing. So it's definitely a difficult um, piece to execute on.
Let's talk about the culture. So when you're hiring, what kind of qualities do you prioritize when you're looking for the people in the team, and how do you try and maintain a strong company culture?
So I think it requires a lot of intentionality, starting in the hiring process. So we've actually our hiring process now, which is not what it started off as, but has definitely yielded better results. Specifically this year, is hey, we're looking for so number one, you start off with kind of your introductory conversation, and then after that, you've got your more tactical job specific interview. But then our last one really is a culture ed interview. And at the end of the day, we're looking for people who want to build and want to build not just business units, but collaborate with individuals and work with really, really good people. And so our focus is, hey, we try and find people who want to build. A lot of times it's people who are very competent, very capable, but they might be in a larger organization that wasn't able to make the type of investment um, around them as an individual as we can. And so one of the things that we've done with our business model is we really focus on growing individual markets. And so people who may have been part of a successful organization, a larger organization, and want to branch out on their own, and it's okay. Do you want to build? How do you want to build? But not only that, but embrace all the aspects of it, and understanding that the opportunity to build also brings on additional responsibility, and people who are and also is going to require that you do things that in previous life may have been below your stature. And so for us to really focus in on those people that meet those that look for those scenarios and look for those environments, that's really where we focus on as it relates to building our team, right? Because we're going to continue to grow, and it's got to be people that want to build good, bad, and ugly, and embrace every aspect of it. And those are the type of people that we really invest behind. And so since we've been bringing on those type of people, we've got some really, really good, solid team. And the other thing too is that when you start bringing on those caliber of individuals, it becomes really clear who doesn't belong.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. They will start attracting more of the same, but then also you'll weed out the ones that don't fit into
Yeah,
that.
it's hey, we're all over here,
Yeah.
and Bobby's over here, and it's just like they're on their own and
The
they're not.
resistance
It
shows.
becomes real obvious when there's only one or two people that are out there on left field.
Yeah.
Whereas if you don't have that kind of strong builder's mentality, you have a bunch of different people, you know, kind of all over the place, and it's difficult to pinpoint exactly where the trouble is or where the strengths are. But then when you start bringing really, really good people that are all kind of have that similar mindset, it becomes real obvious in terms of, all right, this isn't going to work long term.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. It's not just a caliber thing. It's definitely a mentality, a mindset thing as well, because you can have like high caliber people in with a very different way of working or at a different stage in their career where they just want to focus on their pigeonhole into their role or their way of doing things. Just it's a job. I get my deliverables done and that's it. But then that building mentality, that pushing forward, the scrappiness, the wanting to exceed and have an impact in the industry and on the company, that's a mindset that you really need in pretty much every startup, especially from your core team, your first bulk of people. And then that sets your culture, right? Like you said.
Yeah, and then it's also, how you treat people. Especially with in the trades, it's very easy to get in a place where you're just not treating people right, or people have an experience of not being treated right. And so combining those things where, hey, we're going to treat people the right way, we're going to treat people with respect, regardless of where you're at. And then also being super hungry about building our individual markets. Those two things combined are absolutely critical. And then it's also the other thing that it's when you start making the decision that this is what we want to be, you start looking at your team and things that don't fit or things that you used to tolerate or just accept as part of doing business are now like you can't do anymore, right? Because then that undermines the rest of the team and the culture that you're trying to build.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, great points. Great points for entrepreneurs and leaders out there to take heed of. Let's talk about the future for a second. What innovations are you most excited about at PaintJet as you keep an eye on the industry?
Yeah, so for us, really, in addition to just expanding the places that we're operating in the markets that we're in, there's another piece of real time quality control that it really just kind of goes overlooked by the entire industry. I mean, if you look at quality control process right now, if you look at it from a manufacturing standpoint, manufacturing has inline real time QC going nonstop. Um, there's been case studies done, and basically it can reduce the defects by over 60% just by changing from QC at the end to QC in real time. And so for painting, I don't think that's any different. And especially you look at how our technology works, just in terms of how do you get the basic surroundings, how do you determine where you need to paint, um, will it work in this environment? Those readings are already taking place. And so taking that and translating it to go, no go, the surface is prepped properly, the surface is not prepped properly, the concrete is in a state that it's ready to accept paint, or the concrete is not patched properly and needs to go back to the patchers before we even touch it. Or if we apply paint and there's a shallow spot, or there's some holidays, being able to detect those while the paint's still wet, as opposed to after it hardens and cures and then you've got to completely remove it mechanically. That can be super challenging. And then also in terms of, because you're looking at surfaces at hundreds of thousands of square feet, and you may have little square inches here and there that are off. Well, being able to track all those on hundreds of thousands of square feet, it's easy for everything to start looking the same. And so just being able to pinpoint, here's exactly where it was, here's exactly the issue that needs to be remedied, and being able to track those in real time it is very valuable, not only to you, but also the end customer. Because one of the things that we found is that for the most part, the end customer, the asset owner, they have a warranty on this painting project. And that's going to typically be a year or two for the application itself. And then they'll have the product warranty that can be 10, 20. Sometimes there's even infinite length, lifetime warranties. But typically what happens is 9 times out of 10, after the application warranty is over, the paint warranty, the manufacturer warranty, they will typically be able to turn it around on the applicator and say, well, the applicator didn't apply it right, therefore our warranty is null and void. And because there's no documentation, because there's no paper trail, because there's none of that. So being able to collect all that documentation from in real time gives a tremendous amount of value to the asset owner in terms of, nope, it was applied properly. This is how your product data sheet says it needs to be applied. These are all the areas with all of the data that it was applied properly. So therefore, warranty is valid. That's really powerful too, especially when you're looking at these coatings, that they can be hundreds of dollars per gallon. If you look at in the risk standpoint, in terms of, if your coating comes off in an 80,000 barrel container and now contaminates 80,000 barrels of product, that's pretty significant. And so just being able to have that data that can truly prescribe to, here's the quality control, here's the life extension of these products, here's the risk mitigation that we're able to provide, and also streamline the end of the application process, there's a tremendous amount of value there, and it all comes from real-time quality control.
That's huge. Yeah, I didn't even realize that. It's definitely like passing the buck over to the paint applier that their product isn't working. I didn't realize that was such a big problem. Some people argue about robotics eliminating manual jobs and things like that. Obviously, it's a common thing that we talk about in the industry a lot. How do you respond to those kind of concerns? And we've talked about the benefits here, but
yeah. So, I mean, the first thing is, like, we're in a labor shortage. There's physically not enough people to do the work that needs to be done. And so we're not taking any jobs. We're allowing the people that are here to get more done and just work on that backlog. The other thing that we're actually seeing is that this is able to lengthen careers and improve the overall work condition for the laborer themselves. And so instead of being up in Tyvek working with caustic chemicals, they're able to be safely on the ground, in normal street clothes, in a much more comfortable area, and they're away from those chemicals. Also, they're able to paint a lot more. And if you look at it from a productivity standpoint, because they're more productive and the quality of the work is getting better, well, they can actually get wage increases. And because it's taking less time and material to get the work done, there is more margin to go around. So it's one of those things that benefits the worker. And then also, some of the best painters, they've got a ton of experience, but they just can't move as fast as they used to move. And so by putting the robot in their hands, there is an opportunity for them to paint faster than they ever have before, and just really lean on that experience and know-how on what it takes to appropriately paint an object. And then the last piece of this too is that there's plenty of really intricate work that will never be automated. Certainly not anytime soon. And when you look at us, it's just mass application. So any warehouse, you've got accent stripes, you've got doors, windows, bollards, any oil container, you've got the top sides, you've got stairs, any ship, you have the top decking, you have the railings. I mean, you are always have these little detail objects that you're always going to have to paint the traditional way. And so it's never really going to be labor replacement. It's going to be more collaboration with robots. And if you can do that, you can increase earning opportunity in your overall earning income based on extending your careers. And so I really don't think of it as a replacing jobs. It's helping those that are here and in the industry And then also just making it a more attractive job, right? I mean, if you're going to tell me that you want to spend your summers in 90, 100 plus degree heat with 80% humidity for 10 hours a day, I, I don't think many people want to do that for 30 years. And so if we can make those conditions a little bit easier, maybe it's changing the industry from something that people have to do to something that people want to do.
Love that. Yeah. We're on the same page. I always ask it just to like play devil's advocate because we have some people listening that aren't, in the industry and always worry about like, oh, AI is going to take over and robots are going to take over jobs. But yeah, very well said, very well put. And I think the benefits they speak for themselves. Well, look, before we wrap up, I just wanted to see if you had any advice to give to aspiring entrepreneurs or people in who want to break into hard tech robotics and things like that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just, start as soon as possible and start talking to customers as soon as possible. Especially if you're in a big space that a lot of people don't understand, which construction is filled with those and all these little niche opportunities that are actually very significant markets. You talk with customers, you get something hard physical in front of their hands, and you solve real problems. You start getting a pretty compelling story pretty fast. And then you start looking at the type of businesses that you can build. That can snowball itself very quickly. And the only thing that's preventing you from doing that is just not taking that first step. So get started as soon as possible and start talking with customers as soon as possible, because when you get questions asked from investors, at the end of the day, deposit checks, customer feedback, and sales answer a lot of them.
True. Very true. Well, look, Nick, thank you so much for your time again. Thank you for being on the show and sharing all of the insight and giving us the under the hood look at PaintJet. Where can our listeners learn more about PaintJet, follow you, connect with you, and keep an eye on your progress?
Yeah, so connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm not on Twitter or Instagram that much. So connect with me on LinkedIn, and then also we'll be sharing a lot more of our story here coming shortly over the next several months as we get ready to launch our next product. And then by all means, please make my contact information available. I'm always willing to help out other entrepreneurs because I know how tough it can be. So those that are willing to make the jump and take the chance, I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and willing to help out any way I can.
Perfect. Well, Nick, thank you again. I'm looking forward to this one coming out, and let's keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. Had a great time.